friends. We are here today in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. So there's something that I've been saying pretty much every day when it comes to this book, and that is that Paul he's kind of defending himself, but not really. He's really showing grace to people that are being kind of, that we're being kind of awful. And but he's showing a little bit that, he's explaining some of the criticisms that were given to the church about Paul. Some things that weren't true and some things that maybe were true, but Paul is saying it doesn't matter. So what he's addressing here in this chapter is this idea of if you're a leader, if you're a church leader, what exactly does that look like? How are you supposed to sound, and how are you supposed to look? And how is your life supposed to look? So they believed that someone who is really being used by the Holy Spirit is going to look handsome, and they're going to be healthy, and they're going to be wealthy, and they're going to be eloquent. And Paul is addressing that. So what he is saying here is that basically the Holy Spirit works in you. It has nothing to do with the person who's saying it. And so he's saying we don't bend what the scriptures say. We don't bend what Jesus said so that we might sound good, because that would be building us up. That's for our power. And essentially, when you're a preacher, when you're a teacher, when you're an apostle, when you're being someone used by God, it's the Holy Spirit that does the work. And he talks a lot in this part here about the light of the knowledge of the glory of God. And he's saying, the people that don't have the Holy Spirit, they don't have that light. All light does is it shows us. It shows us what's happening. It should, everything that we can see, we can only see through the light that's reflecting off of it. And so Paul here is saying that if you don't have the Holy Spirit, you're essentially blind. You can't see the light of the knowledge of the glory of God. When he's communicating this, he's kind of talking about, the Judaizers that he was talking about in the last chapter. They just can't see it. They don't see the grace that God has been giving them, and so they don't understand what Christianity is all about. So Paul goes on and he says something that's really interesting. He says, this truth, it's in jars of clay. He's talking about himself. He's talking about other people that spread the gospel. He's calling himself jars of clay. Jars of clay essentially means that it's not worth much, and it's just a vessel. It's just a vessel for you to have, the gospel and the Holy Spirit delivered to you. Not only that, clay is brittle. It's frail. You can break jars all the time. So he's like, we're just jars of clay, just bringing the gospel to you. He's saying the gospel is coming to you through people who are broken, who are chipped, who are imperfect, but also, he's really addressing the fact that Paul, they were thinking, if he was being used by God, wouldn't God be healing him of everything all the time? And Paul had issues with his eyes. He had, we don't exactly know what he means by a thorn in the flesh, but he had health problems, that's for sure. And they were kind of saying he was disqualified through this, but what's interesting is Paul is saying absolutely not. When you are a representative of Christ, you're holding his crucifixion in yourself essentially is saying, we worship a God who is crucified for us. Does that mean that God wasn't using him? God the Father wasn't using him because he was crucified? Absolutely not. He says, we're afflicted. We go through hardships all the time. We go through human frailty. And it's through that frailty that God is able to work. God uses our weaknesses for his strength. He is able to make us. I think it's later on in this book he says it, and it's something I was talking to my wife about just a little bit ago. And it says, God was made perfect through our weakness. What he's saying essentially is that this this frailty that we have, it's part of God's glory. And he goes on to talk about the things that are eternal as opposed to things that are not eternal. And it's interesting when you talk to people, maybe worldly people, people that are maybe not interested in the gospel at all, they're interested in worldly things. They might hear us talking about the gospel and they think, okay, here's these people that are putting all their hopes in this imaginary world. They don't have a lot of, they don't, I've heard this expression, they're so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good. And it's interesting that, this physical world that we see, we think that this is the reality. But what Paul is saying here is, this is not the reality. He said the things that we have here is temporary. There's a spiritual world, and while you're here, it seems like it's this imaginary thing, but in reality, that's the real world. That is what's real, and this is just temporary. So that is essentially what Paul is saying in this chapter. I just want to say this. There's a person. He was a person that married us, me and my wife. He was the pastor that married us, and he's a forgiven sinner just like anybody. But for some reason, I feel like he has this spiritual sight that is different from other people. And like I'm saying, he's not perfect, but he has a very good sense. And I look at his life, and I just think of how much God was able to use him, even though when he was young, he had polio, and he got through that fine enough, I guess, and then later on he was hit by like a big truck, and something happened later on where there was some sort of complication with an asthma attack, and his leg was paralyzed, and so he's living the rest of his life with this paralyzed leg. And he started some really great ministries, and God, through that, I don't think that had anything to do with him starting the ministries, but it's just interesting that God used this guy with a paralyzed leg, not someone who's perfect all the time. He's running marathons every day, and recently he had a bad accident where something happened and it hurt his eye, and he had to have his eye removed, and he was at the hospital that I work at, and I tried my hardest. I heard he was there, and it was in the middle of COVID, so it didn't I wasn't able to get to him, but I tried. I wanted to sneak into his room and try him and talk to him, and I just wanted to say, what does it look like? What his eye went to heaven first, and I want to know what it looks like up there, because for some reason I know that, you know, he may not feel like he has a sense of heaven any more than any, you know, the rest of us, but I really think he does. You know, I think that through that, God is using his affliction so that he may have, you know, like it says in this chapter, so that he can have this weight of glory. So that's how the chapter ends. You know, we have this temporary affliction so that we can have this weight of glory that's going to come to us, you know, someday. Anyways, that is 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Have a great day. Bye.